The UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development starts now in 2021 to provide a common framework to ensure ocean science can fully support countries to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Ocean Decade provides a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create a new foundation across the science policy interface to strengthen the management of our oceans and coasts for the benefit of humanity. We are pleased to host this special Island Symposium on the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development with our National Science Foundation Guam EPSCoR program. The NSF includes Seas Island Alliance and the University of Guam Sea Grant program. It is my pleasure now to introduce our first keynote speaker, my friend Nicole Yamase. Nicole is from the islands of Ponte and Chuuk in the Federated States of Micronesia. She graduated from Chaminade University of Honolulu with a bachelor's in biology and environmental studies. She is currently a Ph.D. candidate in the marine biology graduate program at the University of Hawai'i at NOAA. The Micronesia Conservation Trust selected her for the Distinguished Bill Rayner Scholarship. Nicole researches the effects of climate change on the marine plant community in order to understand how our primary producers respond to these changes. This will help us predict the future health of our reefs, which is crucial for the livelihoods of Pacific Islanders who highly depend on the ocean for many purposes.
Hi, everybody. Before I begin my talk, I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to the co-chairs of the conference, the Governor of Guam, Honorable Lou Leon Guerrero, and President of the University of Guam, Thomas Christ. I'd also like to extend my thanks to Dr. Austin Shelton, Director of UOG Sea Grant and Center for Island Sustainability, along with the NSF EPSCoR and Seas Island Alliance. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge my keynote speaker partner today, Craig McLean, Acting Chief Scientist and Assistant Administrator at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This is my first ever keynote speech, so I'm really excited to do it with you all. So today I'll be sharing my journey as a Micronesian, and I want to share my experiences that led me to become the first Pacific Islander, third and youngest female to reach the deepest part of the ocean, the Challenger Deep. And believe it or not, more people have been to the moon than the bottom of the ocean. So that's crazy. Let's dive right in, shall we? So my journey started on a tiny hill called Mabuchi on the beautiful island of Chuuk in the Federated States of Micronesia. This is where Xavier High School, the prestigious Jesuit high school, was located. And Xavier High School served as the communications center during World War II for the Japanese. And as you can see in the left photo, this is a picture of Xavier High School a little after World War II and before they changed the building to be our main campus building today. So on the right photo, this is what Xavier High School looks like. Xavier High School was a really unique school. It was a college prep school, so our days would start at 7:30 a.m. and end at 5 p.m. Now, 7:30 a.m. was the time we had to be on campus by, which meant that the girls had to catch the bus way earlier than that. Another very unique thing about Xavier High School was that the girls had to be sponsored with local families around the island while the boys stayed on campus in the dorms. And this is a picture of me and my sponsor family. This is my brother Jun, me and my sponsor mom, and my sponsor cousin Daryl. So these sponsor families they opened their homes to us. They welcomed the girls from all over Micronesia. You know, we had girls from Guam, from Chuuk, Koshrai, Marshall Islands, Palau. And they took us in like their own children. And, you know, we'd fight with our siblings, we'd get scolded, we'd join all family events and, you know, do chores. So what's beautiful about this is that, you know, even though the sponsor families didn't get anything in return, they did get a beautiful relationship. that was built across families, across our families and their families. So this was a way that Xavier built this strong bond across Micronesia. Now, going back to that 7:30 a.m., like I said, that was when school started. So the girl that lived on the opposite side of Xavier High School, which was my younger sister, by the way, she had to catch the bus at 5:30 a.m. and the sun was still down, so it was still dark. Luckily for me, I lived in the middle of town, so I got to catch the bus at 6:15 a.m. So you can see that every day, just waking up and going to school was a challenge because we had full 12-hour days from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So Xavier didn't only evaluate you by your grades, they also evaluated you by your character. And they evaluated us through the leadership roles that we would take or how we participate in extracurricular activities. While I was at Xavier, I I participated in the basketball team and track team for my 4 years, and at one point I was a secretary, class secretary, and class president as well. So these leadership roles really reflected your initiative, your integrity, and responsibility for yourself and others. And Xavier really shaped us into being well-rounded individuals. And they also promoted friendly competitiveness and celebrated culture, which I really appreciated. And in this photo, this is a picture of me during cultural day. I'm dancing the Tokia Pohnpeian traditional dance with the Pohnpeian district. This is a picture of me from graduation. Xavier only had a population of about 150 students that consisted of students from all over Micronesia. And every year, they would only accept 50 freshmen. Because Xavier was so competitive, students would drop year after year. And so here, this is a picture of my class. I graduated from a class of 31 students. And so, if you graduated from Xavier, it was a really big deal. And I think this picture is evidence of how Xavier is continuing to produce competitive Micronesian leaders, which I think is a symbol that the islands are rising. This is a view of Xavier High School. From Xavier High School, and this is where it all began. This is where I first learned about climate change. We had to write an essay about an environmental issue for class, and one of the topics that was suggested was climate change, and I didn't know what that was, so I selected it, and I had to go home and do some research. So during this time, the only way for me to connect to the Wi-Fi was to use the dial-up connection. So I had to unplug my house phone and use the dial-up connection, but also use the phone card that would charge me for the Wi-Fi that I would use. Let me also add the sporadic power outages we would have. So not only was I limited on time, but also limited on power, I guess. So as soon as I was connected to the Wi-Fi, I found my research articles and I printed them out immediately. And there were many days where I had to complete, assignments and projects with a candle and, with a small lantern by my side. But anyways, Xavier High School, this is where I learned of climate change. I read about um, sea level rise, soil erosion, and places experiencing droughts where others experience floods. And, I felt that I had to go into this. I knew the environmental field was for me. And, how can you not feel compelled to protect this beautiful ocean and land that you see every day? So in 2009, I graduated from Xavier High School and went to Chaminade University of Honolulu, where I majored in environmental studies and biology. During my freshman year, I told my advisor, Dr. Gale, I said, Dr. Gale, I know I really want to go into the environmental field, but I'm not sure which route I want to take, if I want to do marine or terrestrial. And she says, you are the kind of students we are looking for. You should apply for this summer internship called the Undergraduate Research and Mentoring in the Biological Sciences at UH Manoa. And so I was really excited. But when I looked at the application, it said, sophomores only. That was one of the requirements, but I was only a freshman. So I told Dr. Gail, I said, Dr. Gail, I'm not eligible. And she said, no, apply. You have nothing to lose. I see you're passionate, and I see that you come from a diverse background and you're willing to put in the work. So apply for it. So I was pumped up. I took the application and I went to other professors to ask for recommendation letters. So I approached this one professor and said, Professor, can you write me a recommendation letter for this internship? And the professor looks at me and says, why are you applying for this? You're not eligible. And I said, Professor, I know I'm not eligible, but I have a strong support from my advisor. I'm willing to put in the work, and I'm passionate, and I really want to join this summer internship. So he goes, okay, like it was a waste of both of our times. But I went ahead and I applied for it, and guess what? Yes, I got accepted to the internship. So it was a small victory for me. This picture is a picture of me and Dr. Gail, who was my summer mentor, and this is me. We're getting ready to do fish counts out at the Coconut Island, the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. This summer, I looked at the abundance of ornamental fish that were collected for aquariums. So we did transects all over Oahu. We also did transects at Hanauma Bay and Waikiki. And this is another picture of us in Kaneohe Bay. This is Dr. Gail. This is me, and this is Eva Sala from American Samoa, who was also under the mentorship of Dr. Gail that summer. So it was so much fun. And this summer internship was the first time for me to really go through the scientific process. And as you can see on my face, analyzing your results and your data collected is not my favorite part, but you got to start somewhere. And this is the picture that we usually take after summer internships. After the summer internship ends, we have a group symposium. So all the summer interns, they present their work that they did during the summer in front of their mentors and family who participate as well. And so I think this is a great picture. You can see that this internship had students from Yap, from Pohnpei, from Hawaii, from Palau, American Samoa, from Marshall Islands, everywhere. And you can see our strong supporters right next to us. And I think, this photo captures and symbolizes that the islands are rising. And as we continue to participate in these internships, this is what we need, more Pacific Islanders in these fields. So, like I said earlier, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do marine or terrestrial. So the next summer, I applied for the Native American and Pacific Islander research experience. And that's where I studied frogs. Very different, fish and frogs. But I studied the tink frogs, Diasporus vocator, and I characterized its calling sites in the bromeliads. So as you can see here, the frogs are nocturnal. So I did a lot of my field work at night, and you can see that I'm fully geared up in my snake boots, my raincoat, my headlamp, and my Ride in the Rain data book. And because these frogs get scared of light, I had to turn off my headlamp and stand in the dark for a few minutes until they tinked. And then once they tinked, I had to find them in the bromeliad and mark the bromeliad so that I could go back the next day and get characteristics of the bromeliad they called from. This summer internship was, again, so much fun. We had the opportunity to go stay at to visit and stay at all the biological stations in Costa Rica. And we also got to visit the indigenous tribes as well. It really made me homesick because you see the muumuus they're wearing reminded me of the muumuus that we would wear back home. So this is a picture of me talking to the ladies from the Nogobi tribe. And again, as you know, at the end of the summer internship, we would have our symposium and take the traditional group photo. So this was a really interesting experience and eye-opening because we also, the Pacific Islanders, also got to get to learn more about the Native American culture. So lots of fun. And again, another beautiful photo that captures, future young Pacific Island leaders from Hawaii, from Guam, Saipan, Palau, and FSM. And just another way to show that the islands are rising and they're continuing to rise. So after that summer, I had the experience of studying the ocean and studying the frogs. And after that, I said, okay, I know that the ocean is for me. And so I knew that was my route to go. So the following summer, I attended the Leadership Alliance program. And I was very fortunate to go to the University of Miami, where I looked at two different species of Anadiomene. And this was my first ever, the start of my macroalgae days. So I looked at these species and looked at how they responded in different salinity levels. And because this was my first experience, studying macroalgae, I was so curious to continue to work on that. And so the following summer, I went back to the URM program and studied a close relative of Anadiomene, Microdictyon sigilanum. And so, this was a way to connect my macroalgae research that I did in Miami to what I was doing that summer. So I did a lot of field work out at the Nui Nui Fisheries Research Center, where we have these outdoor seawater tanks where I'm able to manipulate different factors. But that summer, I looked at how shading, different irradiance levels affected the growth and photosynthesis of Microdictyon. This is a picture of me and my summer mentor, Dr. Celia Smith. And this is Scott Chilcote, who was also in the same program and under the advisory of Dr. Celia Smith as well. And this is Dave Spafford, who was also a mentor during the summer. So every week we would update Dr. Smith and Dave Spafford with what we were doing. And again, and I'll say it again, this is the traditional group photo we would take. And, it just shows that, we're growing in numbers, and hopefully this has been continuing to inspire and to provide opportunities for Pacific Islanders here from Guam, Saipan, Hawaii, American Samoa, and Palau. So, the islands are rising and are continuing to rise. Now, what was special about this, my last summer internship as an undergrad, is that my summer mentor, Dr. Celia Smith, is currently my graduate chair advisor for my PhD. So I just want you to see how everything just fell into place through my summer internships. And believe it or not, I'm still studying Microdictyon sigilanum for my dissertation. And so really what I want you to see is how these summer internships really paved my way into graduate school, how it narrowed my interests, provided fieldwork experience and opened my networking. And it really made me a strong candidate for the PhD program in the Marine Biology graduate program at UH Manoa. And so really building the foundation of my dissertation. And so, okay, really, I think the moment you've all been waiting for. Preparing the canoe and the Challenger Deep, this opportunity that really just, I'm still processing, even though I came back a few weeks later. But this is the map of the Faroe States of Micronesia's exclusive economic zone in green. As you can see, the Mariana Trench is like a J, and the southern part of the Mariana Trench, that's where the deep sea explorer Victor Vescovo and I dove in the limiting factor. And that's symbolized by this red star here. A little bit more background. The Challenger Deep is the deepest part of the ocean in the world, with a depth of 10,925 meters. And only less than 24 people have been to this location. Some of the Challenger Deep goals, number one is mapping. And we are currently, the seafloor, currently 20% of the seafloor is mapped. And can you imagine what the 80% looks like? Attached to the bottom of the DSSV pressure drop is a multi-beam sonar that really just uses sound waves that shoots sound waves, and it bounces back once it hits the surface. And with that feedback, you know, the ship is able to produce these high definition topography maps as seen here. And the different colors represent different depths. So the purple area is the deepest part, and that's where Victor and I dove. Another goal for the expedition was to collect data, and this is a picture of the landers that were on board. These landers are equipped with many sensors that can measure, you know, temperature, depth, conductivity. It also has a sample box. It can collect water samples and sediment samples as well, and it has a acoustic modem that allows it to communicate with the ship and with the limiting factor. Another goal is to continue to discover new species. This picture is the Dumbo octopus that was seen in the Java Trench. So during their 5 deep expedition, they found over 40 new species. So Victor and the crew's work is so important for us so that we can continue to discover what is down there, because really we cannot properly manage something that we do not know about. Next is promoting STEM and local scientists. This is a picture of Dr. Deo Onda and I. He is the first Filipino to reach the deepest part of the ocean in the world, Emden Deep in the Philippines Trench. And so we are both very thankful to Victor and the crew for, you know, inviting us to represent our nation and also allowing us to be a part of history and to serve as role models for the young rising scientists. And so this I say, you know, the islands are rising indeed. And now this part of my talk, I'll just, you know, the whole trip was so fast. I spent 1 week in Guam. So I'm going to show you what happened during those 7 days. And this is a picture of me on the airplane on United heading to Guam. You know, before I left, I had to take a COVID test to make sure I was negative and to also follow the safety protocols while traveling. As soon as I got off from the airplane, I went to the DSSV pressure drop. So I got on board. And, you know, this vessel is equipped with a wet lab, a dry lab, a gym, cabins, a dining area. And it has really spacious decks that house the limiting factor, the landers, and the smaller boats. I also spent time getting to know people on the boat. So these are the mappers. This is Rochelle Wigley and Aya Perez, and they are the amazing people who are producing those beautiful maps that you saw earlier. They work with a program that trains students how to map. So, and they've brought students on board before. So this is an opportunity for students who are interested in learning about mapping and being part of future expeditions. This is an opportunity for you. I also got acquainted with the DSSV pressure drop crew. Everyone was so wonderful, so professional, but they knew how to have fun. And, you know, they were one of the main reasons why I wasn't scared to go down to the Challenger Deep. Watching them work and preparing the limiting factor, you know, made me feel safe and secure. And I also wanted to point out my friend Larkin, who is the only female on deck. So she's representing us women out there as well. This is the limiting factor. It's the only commercially certified submersible that can go down to any ocean depth multiple times. So in the center is this perfect circle titanium ball, 90 millimeters thick all around. And that's the only thing that's been, you know, stopping us from being crushed on our way down to the Challenger Deep. And around it, it's packed with syntactic foam that's just filled with tiny balloons. This was the night before the dive. They gave me my suit, and obviously it didn't fit. um, not suited, not fitted for Pacific Islanders. So hopefully they'll make some for us. And the first thing I thought about when I put it on was the common blue starfish we have back home, as you can see on the right. And this was the morning of the dive. As you see, we all made history. And this was the moment I got into the limiting factor, and Victor and I were on our way to the Challenger Deep. So this is a picture of Victor and I at the bottom of Challenger Deep. It took us about 4 hours to go down, and we spent 2 hours exploring the bottom. And like I've said before, that it really looked like a desert underwater. And again, I'll say again that even though we didn't see much down there, it doesn't mean that there's no life. Yeah, so this was a really exciting time. This was the moment that I was waiting for, and it happened. And I'm still processing what happened, because everything happened so fast, and it was such a momentous time for all of us, really. The next morning, I had to filter some water, filter the water, the seawater that was collected by the landers, and I got help from Swain and Ruben to help pack the sediment that was collected into tiny Eppendorf tubes. And then this was the day, this was the day Dr. Shelton brought his whole crew to visit me and to welcome me back from the Challenger Deep, which was very nice of them. Now, embracing the voyage, our traditions, our ocean. And when I look at this picture, the first thing that comes to mind, the questions that I ask myself is, who am I and who do I represent? And I think those are two important questions to ask yourself. Ask yourself whenever you start to do something. It just keeps you grounded and centered. So who am I and who do I represent? Growing up, I've always identified myself as a Micronesian. I was born in Pohnpei, but I've spent some time in Palau, Saipan, and Chuuk as well. So that is who I am. Simply, I am a Micronesian. I am a Pacific Islander. And who do I represent? These are simple yet, deep questions. Who do I represent? And the first words that come to mind my family, my culture, my traditions, my ancestors, And so this is what led me to bring down the objects, the items that I brought down with me to the Challenger Deep, because I felt that it really symbolized and represented who I am and who I represent as well. So the first item I brought down is this wooden canoe, and it represents my mom, who is the Micronesian from Pohnpei and Chuuk. It also belongs to my dad, who was my first inspiration to pursue marine biology. The second reason why I brought that down was because it was also in honor of Papa Mau Piailug, who was a master navigator that broke traditions and sacrificed so much for him to bring back traditional navigation to Hawaii and to all of Polynesia. And so that I wanted to bring in honor of him. The second objects or items I brought down were two photos. One of Dr. Isabella Abbott, who was the first Native Hawaiian to receive a Ph.D. in a science. And she was known as the First Lady of Limo. She correctly named almost half of the marine plants that are found in Hawaii. So huge contribution. The second photo is of Dr. Roy Suda. And Dr. Roy Suda made fundamental contributions to understanding macroalgae and seagrasses across the Micronesia region. He served 20 plus years at the University of Guam, holding many positions such as the vice president for academic affairs, interim president, and an instructor, just to name a few. And I was very, very fortunate to meet him a couple of times at the Honolulu Bishop Museum, and I was really hoping to work with him after I graduated. So very important items that represented my family, what I valued, and my traditions and ancestors. So aligning the stars, and when I say aligning the stars, the stars as in your values, your goals, and actions. And value, my family is always um, what I value the most. And, I think it's really important to have a strong support system. Um, they're always going to be there at the end of the day, whether I fail or succeed. And I think that's really important for everyone to have. Your family doesn't have to be blood related. You can find family in coworkers, in your mentors, in your classmates, but just make sure you have that solid foundation of support for you. A second value I have is my education. The best thing you can do now as students is to really do your best in school and take advantage of all the opportunities that are available to you. My dad always told me that education is the key that will open many doors of opportunities, and I couldn't agree more. So, do well in school, get your degrees, and really go as far as you can. And yes, this is another obvious one, the ocean, which I value. You know, I'm one of the lucky ones who can say that I've seen the ocean from the shallow reefs all the way down to the deepest part of the ocean. And yes, everything from the top to the bottom is connected. So, the ocean is our lifeline. So we really need to take care of our oceans, because if our ocean thrives, then we thrive. Goals, unfortunately, I saw marine debris at the bottom of the Challenger Deep. So one of my goals is to really bring awareness, because the fact that I saw trash at the bottom is very alarming, and this calls for action from all stakeholders. And we need to make sure that activities that are happening within these areas are being regulated, and that something like this doesn't happen again. Another goal for me is to graduate. I'm really excited to graduate and to be out there in the working field, to really be a part of organizations that help protect and manage our reefs. Moving on to actions. I really want to help bridge, connections from the University of Hawaii to local organizations back home. And I love this photo because this includes Dr. Timothy Davidson, who is on my graduate committee. He came down with me to Pohnpei to do some research. And this is the Conservation Society of Pohnpei. And this student here is one of their summer interns. So I was really happy to see all of us come together and to work towards a common goal in protecting our reefs. And actions, this is a picture of me at one of our Waikiki algae cleanups. And, we are manually removing invasive algae. And this is an effort that started in the year 2002. And right now you could see the difference, that what the reef looked like before and now. And you could see the native plants and the native herbivores slowly coming back. So with this photo, I really wanted to stress the importance of community engagement, being proactive, but also being self-motivated. Okay, so we all need to work collectively if we want to strive for a sustainable sustainable future. And so with this picture, I wanted it to symbolize, let this picture of us looking out into a future that we want to work towards, for a sustainable future that we want for the next generations, while keeping in mind, where we come from and why we're here. So to conclude, I hope you saw that my story, from my story, that I'm just like each and every one of you guys. I had my ups and downs, but I overcame them. You know, I took advantage of the summer internships, the resources, and my support system. And you know, opportunities like the Challenger Deep will come your way. You know, work hard, take advantage of the opportunities, and you know, also don't forget where you came from. You know, remember what your ancestors sacrificed for you to be here today. So keep on keeping on, because you know, we are rising and the islands are rising. Thank you.
Nicole. So Ma'ase, thank you so much for your amazing keynote address. What marvelous lessons you've shared in your amazing story, your journey to get where you are today. And I know you're inspiring many students here on our islands to do marine science just like you're doing. So thank you so much for agreeing to be our keynote speaker and sharing that story. I've found here on our Zoom that you have some special guests that wanted to say hello to you. Live from the DSSV pressure drop, I believe we have Captain Stuart Buckle and the sub-team leader, Tim McDonald. But I'll let them introduce themselves and let us know who's there.
Hafade, good morning everybody from Guam. We are in port for the day. Hello Nicole, great to see you again. My name is Rob McCallum. I'm the expedition leader here on board, and I'm here with Professor Alan Jameson from the University of Western Australia, who's our chief scientist, and Tim McDonald, who is our sub-pilot. We are to have this opportunity to say good morning to everyone. We have been working in the Pacific for the last couple of years, and as we sail across this vast expanse of ocean, we note that every island is like a stitch in a vast tapestry. Every stitch a little different from the one before and the one after, but together collectively adding this tapestry that spreads across the Pacific. And it's interesting that, you know, when you're talking to anybody from the Pacific, they'll very quickly talk about the past, about their ancestors, where they're from, trying to find common links, how they came together. But life is very difficult in the Pacific because of these vast realms of seawater. We are delighted to be able to provide the opportunity to get all people, but most importantly, the local people, down to the Hadal depths where life itself began, and to start to explore this last part of our planet.
So, yeah, I just want to say it's really interesting times we live in at the moment, in that a lot of these Pacific islands are sitting geographically on very interesting scientific areas, such as the Mariana Trench. I think it's the next 5 or 10 years is going to be really interesting as we try to become more engaged with the local communities, and we can bring some of our technology and share ideas and ventures together. It's going to be really great.
And hello everyone, Hafade. I'd just like to say it was very nice having Nicole on board, and I hope that this has started a trend of our deeper involvement with the Pacific Island nations. And myself personally, I know that the connections we've made through Nicole are hopefully already fostering new relationships with Austin and the University of Guam. And it was really delightful to be able to have Nicole on board and share our vessel and our home and our technology with everyone here.
Thank you very much to the crew. Nicole, did you want to say hello as well?
Hi guys, nice to see you again. Oh, I wish I got to meet you guys in person, but yeah, thank you. I cannot express how thankful I am, and I'll always be thankful for the opportunity you guys provided for me to be a part of the expedition. As you can see, all the love and support from the Pacific Island community and even around the world, that this really inspired many across the globe. And you know, I hope that you will continue to work with us and Pacific Islanders, and you know, allow students to be a part of future expeditions. So thank you guys.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, to get collectively, everybody in the Pacific has traveled laterally across the ocean to get to new and exciting frontiers. We hope to help people start taking the transition down through the layers to explore the last frontier of exploration on Earth. So enjoy your conference. You're doing good work.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you to the crew of the DSSV Pressure Drop and Caladan Oceanic for their contributions to the Ocean Decade and for providing Nicole with that very special opportunity. And we're really thankful for that connection that you helped us make, Nicole, to Tim, the sub-leader there that we just heard from, and the rest of the crew. We're looking forward to finding ways to provide our students here at the University of Guam and other Pacific Island colleges with internships on board the Pressure Drop. So it's really exciting for those new opportunities to come. Now, I am honored to introduce our next keynote speaker. Craig McLean is the Chief Scientist and Assistant Administrator for Oceanic and Atmospheric Research at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. He is responsible for overseeing, directing, and implementing NOAA's research enterprise, including a network of research laboratories and the execution of NOAA programs, including the Climate Program, the National Sea Grant College Program, and Ocean Exploration, just to name a few. Among a number of formal international engagements in science and technology, Mr. McLean serves as the U.S. representative to the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, or the IOC, and as a member of the World Meteorological Organization Research Board. He is also on the executive planning group of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development.
Austin, thank you very much. And I wish half a day to everyone. And it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm joining you from Silver Spring, Maryland, which is nowhere near as exciting as the parts of the world that you just saw. But as the best evidence I could point to that islands are truly rising is to have had an opportunity to meet Nicole. And seeing the vibrance of her energy and her accomplishment, I applaud Nicole. And I also applaud Victor Vescovo, who's a friend and a partner of ours, for his vision in order to be providing opportunities as a private citizen. And Caladan, Victor's organization, his very talented crew, Rob McCallum and company, I know these folks, they're amazing at what they do, but they took very good and special care of a very important young leader who will be a leader very soon in a wider domain of ocean science. Nicole, thank you so much for your inspiration. Your heart is huge, and you've taught me a lot just in the brief amount of time I've had to chat with you and to become acquainted with your accomplishment. We will be seeing much more of you, I know. So for me, a person sitting here in Silver Spring, Maryland, part of the bureaucracy of the United States government, I feel a bit obligated to explain to you that I used to have a real job before I did this. I'm a retired sea captain, and I was captain of a vessel that was the sister ship of the vessel that brought Nicole out to the dive site and launched the vessel. And I'm proud of that career and service that I had, but I'm also proud in a way of how I came to know the Pacific. As a young boy, I heard my father, who's a United States Navy veteran. My dad is gone now, but I remember him and think of him every day for the inspirations that he has lent me. But he journeyed to Guam in 1944 with many other U.S. service members. And I think he, like many, just understood that as what they had to do and didn't think of the larger consequences and opportunities, but I do every day. And the world is much better today, as we know. But my interest in Guam was piqued not just with the beautiful water, the diving, the wonderful people, the warmth of heart, but also I was acquainted with the internet connecting mechanisms that exist in Guam. And it was just remarkable to me. I think when I was introduced to this facility, my colleague opened the door and said, "Here's the internet." And there it was. It's just a remarkable assemblage that proves islands are rising. The triumph of islands is very apparent to me. I had the opportunity to judge science fairs in American Samoa. I was in Yap during the passage of Typhoon Haiyan, and we had an opportunity to visit Rumung Island in a remote location. I have visited Chuuk and got to know the people and also the environment there. in Palau, in Peleliu of Palau, I sat with the Peleliuan legislative body and had early tours through the northwestern Hawaiian Islands before they were named as a marine protected area or the Papahanaumokuakea National Marine Sanctuary and Marine Monument. So my experience with the islands has been absolutely stirring, but that really helped me put in perspective a very logical and very frequent conversation that we've been having in the planning of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, and that is the importance of the role of the island communities, because no one is closer, no one knows more than the residents of island communities to be seeing the effects of global impacts of climate change, and the cultural history and the ancestral knowledge and traditional knowledge are very important for us to be listening to. So with my fondness and appreciation for the islands, if I can just lay that as a groundwork for why this is so important to me, I want to thank our friends at Sea Grant and Austin Shelton for his leadership in a very fine Sea Grant institution out in Guam. I congratulate the Guam Sea Grant program and the Sea Grant program around the nation. I'm your biggest fan. I will always be, and I'm delighted to be here as part of an organization that is helping to advance the state of people's utilization and understanding of the ocean and coasts in a sustainable way. So if I may now transition, please, to a few slides that I've got here. I'll try and go through them quickly. So if you could bear with me, I will just roll on. So with the introduction, I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank President Christ for the invitation, and also Austin for hospitality, and also Torrey Santos, thank you indeed. So let's move on now, if we can, and just talk about the agency I come from for just a moment. With the next slide, please, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And we start with what I think is a very telling Native American saying, that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we indeed borrow it from our children. And there's nothing more compelling for me to realize that than to me to look at my grandchildren and to realize the world they are inheriting is very different than the one I grew up in. And it is my concern to make sure that when I'm done with my work, that they look back in time and say, that grandpa that we had, at least he did what he could do. But if I don't try hard enough, I fear what awaits them. We can do more, we can do better. And I think a lot of what we can do is in the heart and in the soul of the people we find in the island countries, island communities. So next slide, please. In NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, we study the Earth from the sun and looking at sunspots all the way through the atmosphere for climate, through the oceans for climate and marine ecosystems, coastal impacts, the health of coral reefs, the sustainability of fisheries, but all the way to, I'll just say, Nicole, I'll say the deep parts of the ocean. We've not been to the deepest parts of the ocean. Our former NOAA administrator, Kathy Sullivan, did join Victor in a dive to the Mariana Trench, but officially NOAA has not been there yet, and that's an objective that we should seek to achieve. But truly, we are here in a service mode, and our mission is to provide science and scientific understanding to the world, in effect. So the next slide, please, then. NOAA has quite a presence in the Pacific area. We have over 30 offices. And next slide, please, if you could advance. I'm not sure you could see that. There we are. Thank you. We have over 30 enterprises, 30 offices, over 600 people. We're in many places with atmospheric greenhouse gas observations, one at Mauna Loa in Hawaii, the other in American Samoa. I've had the opportunity to visit both of those and many other places, but you could see some of the additional places that we have in Hawaii. And we have done a lot of work with the ocean exploration program in the entire Pacific, not just the Hawaiian Islands, but also in around Guam and even into the farther west of the Pacific. So we're very proud of the presence that we have there, and we're very mindful of our obligations. May I have the next slide, please? In our organization, we have components that you might be familiar with, I hope. The National Marine Fisheries Service is responsible for conserving and managing the United States nation of marine resources. That includes international obligations as well. The Oceans and Atmospheric Research, that's the component that I'm responsible for. This is where most of our climate science and blue water oceanography takes place. We have the National Ocean Service, which actually is a bit more focused on coastal interactions with the ocean. The National Weather Service, which has a far reach and many installations through the Pacific. Then the National Satellite Data and Information Service, which operates our geostationary and polar orbiting satellites. And then, of course, our marine and aviation operations, our ships and our aircraft. Next slide, please. So this agency now is very focused on the instructions that we've received from our new president, President Biden, in looking at opportunities to make progress against the climate crisis that we're dealing with globally, but in particular within each nation. Certainly, the island community knows this very well based on the seasonal, if not increasing vulnerabilities from severe weather and other types of impacts like coral bleaching, like ocean acidification, and overfishing that might be taking place through IUU fishing, illegal, underreported, and unregulated fishing. We also have from the president something that's very close to my motivation, which is scientific integrity. You may know that we had some episodes in the past 4 years, which were, to me, very embarrassing that took place, and we're doing everything we can in order to fulfill the integrity of science so that it is not questioned. People may disagree with the policy implications that science might suggest, but they cannot be misappropriating truths in order to challenge the science. Then we have another executive order on basically establishing equity and demonstrating the solutions to climate change throughout our entire economic ecosystem, if you will. Next slide, please. As we move into the Pacific and we see Guam at the center of these connections from the internet, I also realize that there's so much here in this part of the world. The few places that I've been able to visit have impressed me greatly, but realizing this technical hub that exists in just one of the islands and the opportunities that are available to us as ocean students throughout this vast area, as Rob McCallum was describing. I think that was a very creative way that he chose to explain his views, and I applaud that and believe in that. With the next slide, I want to go back, though, to something that really taught me a lot, and that is an experience I had on the Hokulea, where Nainoa Thompson took me and several other folks out on a cruise, teaching me how to navigate by the stars. No sextant, no modern electronics, just simply navigating by the stars. It was probably one of the most stirring and truly memorable events that I will ever have as a navigator or as a mariner, and taught by a master as well. But let me then go to the next slide and say that there was something that greatly impacted me in my life, which was having an opportunity to dive on the Titanic. But let me put this in perspective. I brought this slide forward because I knew that I was sharing the podium with Nicole. This Titanic adventure was grand in my book, but I wasn't even half the depth of what Nicole achieved in her dive to the Mariana. So there is just amazing greatness underwater waiting to be discovered. So let's look at that with the next slide. If we contemplate the Earth's ocean, here is the dry sphere, Earth, and that small ball of water that's placed over approximately Kansas or Colorado, that is the entire volume of water on Earth, and it's dispersed around planet Earth. And when you look at it in such a manner of relative value, it's almost hard for us to imagine how we humans have had such an impact on that body of water and that very thin envelope, 60 kilometers or so, of atmosphere that surrounds us. But yet we have, with the global population, the way we have chosen to live, and the way that we're impacting the Earth. But let's move now to see what those impacts are. Next slide, please. In short summary, thank you. In short summary, you could see the trends that are alarming. We obviously know what land temperatures are. Few folks other than island nations are looking at what is the water temperature change? How are the oceans heating? How are we decreasing snowpack? Glaciers are melting. You can see these for yourself. These are documented, these are measured, these are scientifically derived, very alarming conclusions of the current state of the Earth. So now with the next slide, if we take these physical science trends and start to apply the biological layers, the human factors, the reality of the life that we live in, we realize that there has been an amazing confluence of interest and international priorities stated throughout our ocean series of meetings, the United Nations Oceans Conference, and organizations like the World Ocean Conference that is sponsored by the Economist Group, many others. These problems keep rising. climate change, sustainable fisheries, IUU fishing. You can read the list here. These commonly come up, these commonly compel us to do something and to do something more. So in search of a solution, I would offer you that the UN Decade of Ocean Science constitutes an opportunity, next slide please, much as we had back in days that I can remember almost. Rachel Carson's book, The Sea Around Us, was a remarkable awakening. And then, of course, Captain Cousteau's World Without Sun. These predate me, but these very much in my later reading gave me an awakening, gave me an inspiration. And we are at that moment, ladies and gentlemen, with the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development to have the same kind of impact on society as did these episodes and these awakenings. And if we have early career professionals like Nicole able to help explain this to many audiences, we are going to awaken many people and cause that societal shift, that social change, that restructuring of our manner of living as humans in order to be positive and constructive. But next slide, please. We're not the only ones looking at this. If we look at and recognize the Sustainable Development Goals that were developed by all the nations of the United Nations, they are compelling, they are important, and they have a 2030 goal. But I call to your attention number 14, Life Below Water, which is really the theme of ocean that we're pursuing and that we're spending so much of our time on. So then with the next slide, please, in order to implement these goals, and so many of them relate back to goal 14, we were pleased to develop and work hard on the Decade of Ocean Science, which became passed by the United Nations General Assembly, and the decade was proclaimed to start in 2021 and will last for 10 years. Now, decades have come and gone in the United Nations sector, and we are committed to make sure that this will not come and go without notice, but that this will come, arrive, and compel people to act with such notice as did Rachel Carson and Jacques Cousteau give to the world about the awakening of oceans. So how will we do that? With the next slide, please. We have 7 societal outcomes that we seek to achieve. These are shown with the relative association with other sustainable development goals on the right-hand side, but these I will be very brief, but they're described in greater detail in the implementation plan. A clean ocean. Of course, we want a clean ocean with pollution removed and the sources arrested and stopped. Next, a healthy and resilient ocean where the ecosystems, while understood, are managed and dealt with in a manner that protects them from hazards, and those hazards can be harming us as well. So the healthy and resilient ocean. The productive ocean allows the marine biosphere to continue to be providing protein for food and food security, but also a balanced ecosystem. Then with the next slide, please, we have 3 more. And that would include a predicted ocean. With all these observations and measurements we're making, we need to distill those down into ability to predict the future ocean state and to understand what is happening to the ocean now. A safe ocean, in order to provide accurate forecasts and an opportunity for people to avoid the harms that may fall them, whether they be tropical cyclones, tsunamis, many other elements. An accessible ocean, make the information and access to the ocean and ocean information very real and very achievable. But now number 7, this is my favorite, please. Next slide. There is nothing more inspiring and engaging than an ocean experience. And we value this very highly. This decade is not just science for greater discovery and understanding. It's to awaken people, excite their passions, bring them on board to understand why the oceans are important, and to allow humanity to enjoy what it is that we do enjoy from the oceans. That's health, wealth, prosperity, and an opportunity to enjoy one's own wellness. So there's a team that's been working on this at the IOC. And with the next slide, I introduce you to our, now we're titled as the Interim Advisory Board. We had been the Executive Planning Group. We've been meeting for the past 2.5 years, helped to develop with the IOC staff the implementation plan. Just to show you the diversity of the offerings here, I'll go from the upper left down to the lower right. We have people hailing from Mexico, from Sweden, South Africa, Egypt, Russia, Korea, Australia, Costa Rica, Portugal, Germany, India, Japan, China, and my good friend Jens Kruger, who hails from Fiji, who is representing the Pacific Islands and has very strong and respected voice for the needs of the islands. We have the bottom 4 are largely from America. but I will point out my colleague from Scripps Institute of Oceanography, Margaret Leinen. And then on the bottom right, we have an early career professional who is Erin Setherwaite, who is actually working in Sea Grant in Scripps Institute of Oceanography. So we had a rather balanced global perspective. The islands were very well represented by Jens. And to further underscore this point, with the next slide, please, I'll show you that we had a series of global workshops. And the right-hand side, you could see the Pacific Community, which was held in New Caledonia, July 2019. It was one of the earliest of the meetings that we did have around the globe. And we sought to hear and listen to the needs that were expressed by these various communities, from the Pacific community through the South Atlantic, North Atlantic, Arctic, each of these areas. And with the next slide, you can see what it was that we heard and what we came to focus on. Climate change and sea level rise, very logical conclusion, but we needed to hear it. We needed to have it expressed by the local people. The developmental opportunity of the Pacific region working as a group, as a team, and to plan collectively. Looking at indigenous and traditional knowledge is very important. That's memorialized in the decade implementation plan. Capacity development and youth leadership, exactly where we need to be. Having people like Nicole, giving Nicole an opportunity to find and develop marine stations in Ponape. I think that is an ambition that she has in mind. And I think we need to find either philanthropy or governments to be able to help fund and realize that not dream, realize that reality that's coming. Regional partnerships through existing organizations and locally led, I stress that, locally led long-term sustainable research initiatives, not just dropping in, doing a study or two for one grant cycle and then leaving, but long-term. We hear this loud and clear. This is very much a part of what we're trying to cultivate with the Decade of Ocean Science implementation plan. So then please, with the next slide, we can move on to that implementation plan itself. This is available on the web. Just look for IOC. Now be careful. If you just look for IOC, you're going to get the International Olympic Committee. But if you look under UNESCO, IOC, UN Decade, you can find this plan quite easily. And the first part is just to describe the genesis, rationale, vision, etc. The second part, looking at this framework, this structure that we have in order to identify and advance proposals and activities. And then looking at third part, the implementation mechanisms, which include opportunities to find funding. There's no single pot of money that constitutes the Decade for Ocean Science funding. This will have to come from governments. And I think we and many governments are prepared to reach this challenge because it provides such an amazing leveraging opportunity for everyone, not just nations of wealth and high development, but for economies that are still building, economies that are still developing. But the idea to team up, to partner up, is what the Decade is going to be about. And look at what we can accomplish together, far more than any one of us would be able to dream about accomplishing alone. So then, with the next slide, the implementation mechanism identifies, obviously in the science perspective, what are the scientific projects that we need to generate that will inform opportunities for sustainable development. This is not just science to advance curiosity-driven research and understanding. This is to develop science-based solutions that are going to help sustainable development to both recover the ocean and advance our sustainable use of ocean resources. Next is planning and coordination, how we bring different parties together. This is an activity that we can help with. And then third is finance. How do we mobilize the resources in order to fund what we have as a bold ambition for decade-long scientific study, once again, informing with societal relevance solutions. Next slide, please. There are hierarchies of activities that we will take into account. So we've had the first call for what the IOC is describing as programs. And these are global in scope or major ocean basin campaigns in scope and scale. Next, we will have shortly coming in the spring, ocean projects, decade projects that are of more localized, but not quite as wide in basin scale. They may involve fewer parties or partners, but certainly are partnership oriented. And then last is a decade activity, which is smaller in scale, important nonetheless, but we're just trying to manage the size, scale, and scope of campaigns, then projects, then activities. Next slide, please. What we've done in the United States is to develop a decade national committee. Now, the national committees are something that the IOC has asked every nation to stand up. And what we chose to do was to ask the Ocean Studies Board of the National Academies of Science to take this role. They've done so. They've had what they called the ocean shot, analogous to the moon shot. What are the big ideas? What are those large challenges? What can we think of and put together? We've done that, and we're helping to fashion and assemble these in a way, once again, finding partners, finding financing, and then be able to introduce these in a submission to the IOC. So this is separate and parallel, but clearly related to. It's an entrance funnel. It's not a filter. It's an entrance funnel for ideas that can have U.S. interests advance. Many other countries are doing the same thing, but it encourages the parties, whether it be philanthropies, government agencies, individual scientists, groups of scientists, to work together in order to put a project, a program, or an activity together and bring it forward. So we're very grateful to the National Academies for their support in helping this national committee move forward. Next slide, please. So where we are right now is that we plan to have, even though the decade started on New Year's Day, we had planned to have an in-person celebration and kickoff that the German government was very willing to host in Berlin in June. We've had to make that a virtual event rather than a physical event, but we will have this kickoff in June. We will there then have about, well, at a rotation of about every 6 weeks, what we're calling decade laboratories, which will again be virtual events. They will be held around the world so that every time zone is accommodated and people do not need to stay up very late or arise early in the morning in order to participate. But these decade laboratories will mirror the 7 societal outcomes, those 7 that I introduced to you. I'm joined by a German leader in science, Detlef Stammer, and we are co-planning or co-chairing the predicted ocean activity. There are similar teams that are doing each. My colleague Jens Kruger, who I introduced earlier, is of the Pacific Islands, is involved in Safe Ocean as well. So we have a lot of reach, and these will be around the clock, around the world, over a 48-hour period of time for each of these laboratories. Then we also have a virtual event in the Western Pacific, a kickoff event that is scheduled for August 24th and 25th. That is details still fashioning, but we'll be able to circulate those details. And then lastly, you want to remind folks to still be able to submit to the U.S. committee for help in developing and finding partners, what might be eventually submitted to the IOC for the UN Decade of Ocean Science. So let me then move now to the next slide and recognize that indeed the islands are rising, and to see really where these priorities that have come from the island leadership community in Guam green growth and other aspects, you're right on target with what the decade is looking for and what all the planning has hoped to see expressed. So I think the direction that the island communities are moving in, whether they be Caribbean or whether they be Pacific, these are the right directions to be going in, recognizing locally informed and culturally relevant initiatives. How do we provide an opportunity for greater prosperity to live perhaps in greater comfort economically, but sustainably, and not be harming the environment as we do it? Next slide, please. Also, looking at some of the other areas that I am really inspired by, the Climate Change in Guam document I've had a chance to review. I want to thank our National Science Foundation colleagues for their opportunities provided, and the EPSCoR, Guam Ecosystems Collaboration, et cetera. That is a very important series of opportunities. Finding partners such as these, building on these in a partnership enterprise, is an opportunity for us all. Next slide, please. And clearly not leaving behind the youth and early career professionals. I celebrate these organizations and what they're achieving. And once again, I will always celebrate Sea Grant for the excellent work that Sea Grant does throughout the community. But it's the young people, it's the early career people who are going to replace me. I may be able to start the decade. I will not finish it. Our young people will be finishing it. And we need to bring them on board early, richly, and fully invested, because they will carry this decade forward. So as I move now, I will say with the last slide, I am inspired to be among you, providing these remarks to help you understand the decade. There is a huge billboard on the side of the road that we will all be passing every day, and it says oceans. And I want you to take with that the recognition that this UN decade is an opportunity to raise awareness globally, to raise awareness locally, and to be bringing the level of inspiration we heard through Nicole's story of her young life and what she is ready to already accomplished, but what she is ready to further accomplish. I will take my inspiration from Nicole and early career professionals. I will also take my inspiration from, there's one man here I never met and I can't call a friend because that's Captain Cousteau, and he was gone long before I came of age. But these other three folks, I'm proud to call friends, colleagues, and I take my inspiration from Nainoa Thompson, a great wayfarer, from Sylvia Earle and Bob Ballard, explorer. Let's go and get it. Let's bring this ocean to reality, and let's bring this UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development to success, where the islands are rising and very well represented. Thank you all very much.
So Juice Maasi, and thank you, Craig, for that amazing keynote address. We really appreciate you saying yes to our invitation to join us for our 12th University of Guam Conference on Island Sustainability. And I just want to say thank you so much for your national and global leadership in oceanic and atmospheric science. Those of us who are familiar with the NOAA network know you for your courage and your integrity, and for always being willing to stand up for scientists and the scientists that work with you. So thank you very much. Now I would like to spend the next 10 minutes of this conference session to ask you and Nicole both a couple of questions, and then give you some time to ask each other questions. So I think we have both of you back on stage, and I just want to start off with this one, because we have a couple questions that came in from the audience, so I'm going to try to put them together as best as I can. So first part is for Craig. Craig, what do you think are some of the opportunities for islands to become more engaged in the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science? You mentioned a few of them, but let's focus in on that island engagement. And then Nicole, the second part of the question is for you. Since you visited many islands throughout your young career, and you're from multiple islands here in Micronesia, how do you think we can create cohesion among the islands to face the climate crisis and to be engaged in the ocean decade? So we'll start with Craig. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Austin, for that question. I think that the islands should think both locally and globally, but start locally, because island communities know the challenges right in your front yard better than anyone else does. And what is a concern to the island communities? Sea level rise, ocean acidification, coral blights, decrease in fish productivity. Each of these issues is global, but it can start with the very focused and keen eyes of people who are on what are the most effective ocean observing stations that we have. Those are the island communities. So as we can enhance the tools that are available to island communities and work on, where necessary, capacity development, and also rely on existing capacity, like the excellent science of the University of Guam, these are bridge building elements. But that which you see locally is a global challenge, and building and finding partners to work locally and globally, I think, is really what the decade has available to us. So believe in the community, understand the problems the community has and challenges that the community has, and let's work together to find where the solutions are and where the partners can be found to help bring in resources to make these studies as robust as possible.
Thank you, Craig. And Nicole, again, for your part, how do we create cohesion among our islands for the climate crisis and for the ocean decade?
Yeah, growing up, I was very fortunate to be exposed to all the different cultures from the islands that I grew up in. Commonalities, we all share a strong and intimate connection with the land and ocean, and we know that our livelihoods depend on our natural resources. And so, we're also a very communal society, and it's always been that way from the very beginning. And we need to really work collectively. Like I've said in my talk, that really collectively, that's the only way. If we want to tackle climate change, we need to work together. We need to pool our resources. And, in order for us to move forward towards a more sustainable future is, being able to provide these opportunities for our young scientists so that they can also come in and also contribute to this movement. And really, climate change, like I said, climate change is going to be a long-term solution, and long-term problem. And so we're going to need long-term solutions for that. And I believe it's in the education of our youth.
Thank you for those responses. Nicole, just like you, I appreciate the importance of having opportunities for young Pacific Islanders to engage in marine sciences. I was fortunate to get to know you when we overlapped at graduate school at the University of Hawai'i. And I know you have a question in this area about opportunities for student engagement that you might have for Craig.
Yeah, so what do you, are there summer internship opportunities that NOAA provides for students that are from Point Bay, from Chuuk, from Guam, from Marshall Islands, like in their respective islands?
Well, Nicole, I would say that the current state of the federal government's recognition of diversity is remarkably enhanced and very enthusiastic, as evidenced by the president's executive orders and presidential memoranda, instructing us as federal agencies to be more open, more equitable in the distribution of what the government has to offer. We do have internships. We do have opportunities for students from all over. And one of them is in the Sea Grant Marine Policy Fellowship. And I know that we have many veterans of that program that are, I'm pretty sure, on the line right now listening in. But we also have academic, not that the Marine Policy Fellowship is not academic, but the more traditional physical biological science opportunities for internships. So very definitely, and anyone interested, I would commend you to the NOAA website and look at the NOAA Education Office. They have a list of the programs that students can enroll in, and that ranges from undergraduates with the Hollings Scholarship all the way through postdoc, and that includes climate postdocs as well. Just giving you a little nudge there, Nicole. But there is a climate postdoctoral fellowship program that we do run, and we have international students in that program as well.
So these internships, they bring students out from the islands, or are they able to do the internships at home?
They're generally focused. I think the way to do them in the islands would be for us to fashion a project that's in the islands, and the decade could be the vehicle to do that. But mostly the internships are at NOAA facilities, either in Hawaii or on the mainland, in our laboratory structure or our fisheries structure as well. You and I need to follow up on that, and I can fill you in further. But for anyone interested, the NOAA education program is a good place to start.
And Nicole, and I could just jump in and say how, as a NOAA-funded program for the University of Guam Sea Grant, we are facilitating a few internships this summer, partly funded by our National Science Foundation Includes program as well. So I think we have at least several research positions for students in the College of Micronesia, the Northern Marianas College, and College of Marshall Islands. So I think Dr. Cheryl Sangeza on Thursday morning Guam time on her panel will talk about that Seas Includes Alliance and some of the opportunities coming through there. Right now with travel restrictions, it's going to be virtual research experiences, but I know in the future years we're going to be able to get a lot more crossover between us. And then one of those NOAA fellows that Craig was talking about, Lauren Swaddell, will be up next on the stage after this session. She's a former CNOE fellow in Washington, D.C. She moved back home to Guam, and we're happy to have her working full-time here. But enough from me. I want to give Craig a chance to ask Nicole some questions as well.
Nicole, I would like you to tell me, if you can, 5 years from now, where are you and what's your dream job? And then we're going to figure out how to get you there.
So Oh, my dream job. Okay, if I had all the money in the world, like I told you earlier, I would love to start a marine lab in Pohnpei. I understand that a lot of students back home don't have the resources and opportunities to come out to have the same opportunities that I had as an undergrad. And so my goal is to bring that home to them. I think it's really important, to have this marine lab that will train upcoming young scientists in the fields, and also provide opportunities where we can have young mentors stem from this lab as well, because that's really important to have, to see, to let the younger people see that there are mentors that are from Pohnpei who are successful, and they could serve as role models to show that, oh my gosh, she's from Pohnpei, if she can do it, I can do it. And so that's what I'm really passionate about, is really bringing all those, maybe my marine lab could also provide summer internships or even summer exchange programs across the Micronesia region. And like I said, if I had all the money in the world, even like international internships where students can have the opportunity to go out, but also, come into different islands and learn about the different challenges that we face. So yeah, I want to do a lot of work. I would also like to teach and, work for an environmental organization. But really, I think deep down, if I could have my own marine lab and, produce an army of the new upcoming young Micronesian scientists, that would be it.
Nicole, I encourage you in that, and I would forecast that this decade of ocean science will be the time that you're able to achieve that. And I think if you can just continue to socialize that vision, you're going to find the people that are willing to share that with you and help to fund it and create it. I think it's a marvelous ambition, and it's one that will be real.
Oh, thank you. I need to graduate
Well,
first.
Craig and Nicole, unfortunately, we're coming up to the end of our this first conference session, but I'd like to thank you, CIS2021 again, so much for being our keynote speakers for this very special Island Symposium on the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. We ask all of our participants there in our Zoom room and on the Whova platform to stick around for the Guam Green Growth Biannual Meeting coming up next, where we'll be discussing all the progress that our island of Guam is making on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we'll also be hearing from some of our global partners. So please stick around, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning for the next plenary session of our conference starting 8:30 a.m. Guam time.
Thank you so much.